Up to you, mate.
Depends how long your presentation is.
It might be a bit long, so I think I will begin.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna I think I'll just start. So welcome to the morning talks, or breakfast talks. It's probably got a better ring to it. These talks I'm gonna do over the next 2 weeks, just sharing all of the insights from Foodhall over the last 5 years, just in different areas and focusing on different parts of the project. So there'll be some parts about the economy, there'll be some parts about the way we've got funding, there'll be bits about governance and how the governance has evolved and developed, and hopefully all of these will culminate into a load of really interesting insights. At the same time as this, I'm trying to write up or do a write-up to accompany each of the presentations. So like a small piece of writing that if people can't come or attend the presentations, then there'll be a kind of a written version that will allow people to access the same information a little bit easier. But the best thing should be the presentation. So yeah, today's talk is about the new building in Brown Street and the community consultation work, but also the processes we've been developing and using on this Brown Street project. Essentially, I wanted to start with a little bit about the Foodhall project. I know everyone in this space has probably seen these slides before, so I'm gonna just run through them quite quickly to talk a little bit about a bit of context as to how we've done it before, but I won't spend too much time on it. And then I'll go right into the Brown Street work. So a lot of the Foodhall project's work has developed from an action research methodology. So we do actions, or we do research first, and then we do actions that then come from that research, and then that feeds into further research. And that kind of cycle allows us to develop, I would say, a more appropriate response to designing for people in the local area, kind of designing for their true needs and researching what they are and listening to what people want and things like that. One of the big findings, of course, was from our research was that there's a couple of missing typologies within the city. And one of those typologies is the open public space for food sharing or sharing food. And a lot of communities developed around this and evolved around this historically. But today there's a lack of these infrastructures in our cities and towns. And this has implications for kind of our ideologies and our ideological changes in society. Often you can see a lot of our ideology can be kind of read through the medium of how we exchange food, how we share food, how we eat communally or eat individually, and how the different kind of spaces over time reflect the ideological disposition of the people at the time. You can read that through history. Like there were at one point people were eating in Anglo-Saxon kind of great halls. At another time they were eating in regal dining houses and then public houses, domestic scale, domestic scale dining rooms were a big thing. The family home, coffee houses, the Frankfurt kitchens, which a lot of us have now, and fast food chains, supermarkets, food banks, all representative of kind of different ideologies that have evolved and developed over different times. So there's a dialogue around that. Obviously, the idea is that if we can create new spaces, then we can develop a lot of new services and activities on top of this. But at the same time, we can kind of keep this feedback loop of the end user kind of informing what they want, and us researching that, developing a plan of action, and then hopefully collecting kind of some information or data on the successes or failures of that and seeing how we can move forward. So this has evolved into like quite a, you know, a bouncy series of changes over the years as people's needs have shifted and what people want. We've started to offer and do different things alongside the food. And this allowed, you know, this was underpinned by the ideas of flexible space and flexible architecture and flexible ways of creating space to accommodate these different groups. Yeah, so as we developed kind of a lot of different branches that focused on different community needs, and that affected or changed the impact, but also changed the way we develop our space. And like people ask for different things, and we build them. And we also developed a new kind of service from that. So as people come to the space, they see kind of new kinds of social workers that operate and exist within those spaces that help them through their troubles, and they help them kind of grow as a person and develop some morale and sensibility, such as now in the position like Johnny and Dave are doing a lot of that well-being work, which was something we discovered from our action research essentially. So Brown Street is a new building. So we've, although we've got a really long legacy of developing and creating interesting spaces and identifying what people need and trying to respond to them in this kind of action research approach, we the excitement of having an entirely new building and a kind of an open shell also brings with it a lot of challenges. Since we developed, for example, we've grown a lot bigger as a community, whereas it was perhaps a lot easier to manage when there were 3 or 4, 5 people working on the project and kind of listening to people, end users that came into the space and trying to action what they wanted from their feedback. But as the community's grown into, say, you know, I think there's over 500 people on the voluntary mailing list at the moment. That offers a new series of challenges, but also a new series of kind of potential needs and opportunities to respond to with a new cultural centre or community centre. As many of you may, I think everyone here has been to the building, apart from Lawrence maybe. It's opposite Site Gallery. It's this kind of old 1930s. It was originally a 1930s building, and there's been kind of 2 major extensions to it in the 1950s and later in the 1970s, where there was an asbestos roof placed on the back of the building. And yeah, essentially realizing that this project, it's always been a long-term vision of ours to have a permanent space or a permanent venue that we can kind of do long-term changes to, and create a kind of an element of solidity and security for us. But there's also challenges in terms of the global climate at the moment. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but also there's a sense of urgency to fill the space and start using it already, whilst at the same time we're defining exactly what it is, you know, that's going in there. So normally, of course, like you kind of prepare a brief, you design the concept, you'll develop how the spaces will work, you'll look at the technical design and manufacture it, and kind of that will be a quite seamless process. But there's an additional layer of complexity in the fact that we've got this kind of, I guess, quite distributed community that has, will kind of start using the space for different things. All the meanwhile, we're undergoing quite an extensive design and development process with many of the community members who exist, who maybe aren't taking the initiative to use the spaces as they are. So that's a really that's been a additional layer of complexity, or added a layer of complexity to the project, because we're simultaneously using and also defining the user's needs. The idea, of course, is that we might create some temporary interventions, or we'll do a series of phases in the building that culminate into a larger scale or a longer term development or cultural center on the site. So acting local immediately, acting local and using the immediate things. So we have, sorry, I'm getting a bit tongue tied there, but that will allow us to kind of develop the space in a simple capacity, and then from our extended findings from our initial studies and kind of our feedback loop of user feedback, that will determine the kind of the larger use of the space, and also kind of some more expensive material interventions that we'll make. And over the long term, perhaps looking at how we create, or that fits into stuff like a community land trust, and looking into larger development. So a large part of my work up to this point has been doing community consultations. I mean, it's not necessarily community, it's more like community conversations at the moment, and a lot of them. So for people that don't know, or aren't clear as to why we do this, good spatial design starts with a really clear program. So a program is what happens within a building, a service, or a site and the wider area, and the activities and functions of the building. So from the everyday public activities to the periodic maintenance requirements, this needs to be included in a good program. So in practice, this often includes zones or elements and how they're organized together, but a really good program, it comes from a genuine understanding of the end user's base. So normally from a lot of first-hand research, and it accommodates the obvious needs, but also scratches the surface and accommodates the needs that aren't really explicit, as well as the design for possible multiple different futures of the project or of the program. So putting a greater emphasis at the beginning on developing a program allows every aspect to be considered by the kind of design team. And designing a program in this sense is essentially designing the public service itself. So we're not just asking what the community want, but actually unpicking what they want in their lives. So you're not just asking what do you want in the space, but you're actually saying, well, how do you want to live in the future, which often public services and public spaces fail at this point, or this research point, where they don't really go very deep into the program. They say, oh, well, what somebody said, we need a we'll give them a kind of hall or something like that, and that's enough, isn't it? Like normally people have multiple complex needs, and are quite frustrated if things are created without an innate understanding or a deeper understanding of their needs. So spending a good amount of time here hopefully will lower cost and lower and increase the usability and the usefulness and the beauty and the knowledge embedded within the spaces, so rather than just being a project looking at the built environment, also kind of trying to instill a certain aspect of knowledge and the understanding of the community into the spaces. And that's what builds into this. Normally, projects on our budget don't go this deep into, don't do this much community consultation. So we're kind of like doing an extensive, but this is where we really, I think, excel as design communities and as research communities. So the big difference of this and why kind of like doing why it's important to focus on this area as the largest area of study is it's kind of like thinking about it like it's the software of the building. Like often people have spoken or think about things, the architecture, as hardware, but that's just one part. A lot of the architectural hardware in our cities is actually quite naive. And for instance, the shop, like there's hundreds of shops and they all function in the same way. There's the producer, consumer, you just walk in, you buy what you want and you leave. And like, that's actually like really widespread, but actually a kind of a very simplistic way of seeing how we can use space and how we can live together. It's quite binary and actually quite old hardware, but with the hardware we have, can we develop better software that can run on a different hardware, you know? So not talking about it literally, but like, can we develop these kind of these patterns of use and patterns of engagement that allow different ways of living and different forms of being in a city. So I mentioned before that there's a lot of communities to consult. So here's a quick map, like a bit of a map of the different communities that we essentially have and our different branches. And it's really difficult because they're almost like tickers. They just flash on and flash off and you're never sure whether they exist or not. And sometimes they really, really exist. And then other times they just disappear because all the communities just, I guess, disappeared. There's not so much continuity, but that's, this is like an insight into some of our branches. So we've had the Open Journal. I think Mitto's picking that up now. Had a lot of mutual education platforms. Late, the food delivery project, kind of a bike hall, fixing bikes and things like that. We've got the staff, we've got the community workshop, we've got community radios, pottery studios. We also had tech, film nights, the Foodhall artists, and we've got a lot of other communities that are emerging now. And there's also a lot of secondary partners and people that we work with and we accommodate extensively that we've never you know, it's keen to start to prioritize how we accommodate them more and how we accommodate them better. So we have like Access Space, Open Kitchen Social Club, within Nesbit, Green New Deal groups, kind of Climate Action Network, VAS, things like that. And there's a lot of third degree partnerships like Social Art Network and kind of all of these different groups that we're kind of connected with tangentially. Yes, Popo will be here, but they're like wider networks. So we've got these different groups that we're kind of a part of, and kind of a constellation of different partnerships we've built because of the way we've operated. So kind of spending time to listen to them, but the majority of the focus at the beginning, at least, has been just talking to the actual end users, the people that come into the space, and remembering that like the people that actually use the space day to day are the heart of the whole thing. Like if they're there, then they should be spoken to and understood, even if they're not engaging in large group meetings, or even if they're not kind of able to come on like digitally online. Like they're the people who are using it the most. So starting with them was a big thing, really, really important for me, because often what can happen, and this is one of the big problems with community consultation, is especially in more like, I guess, alternative groups, you kind of get a bit of a bottleneck of information that comes from kind of management, and like typically this happens in spatial design or public service design, where the management will kind of have very clear or keen ideas as to how the things should work and how things should run. and it's difficult, not because those individuals have those ideas or needs, but it's difficult to accommodate all of them because there's a lot of conversation and people talk over each other, and actually it ends up becoming a really simplistic response as a result of this process. So to give you a quick example of a typical failing of a kind of design project, picture a public housing block that hundreds of people live and use every day. This particular block has caused a lot of people issues with their mental health. It's overcrowded and neighbours are isolated, and the local council realise this. And as a bid to resolve these issues, they begin a design process. But a few community consultations are carried out, but it's only to a single group that attends. And the users that attend meetings are normally time rich and represent a fraction of the overall users. The questions are limited by time constraints, and people only have the chance to mention things that they feel comfortable about. And when the findings are communicated to the upper management team, some important factors are missed off because they feel too complex or difficult to articulate succinctly. There are other concerns that these might be seen as silly or unlikely to be provided by the management, and these will just be missed off a list. The management team then has several meetings, and this political battleground of conflicting incentives and several circles of conversation means that they finally create a brief for the designer that satisfies the needs from all of the people in the room. And whilst the management relays the requirements to the designer, there's a further potential for misunderstanding as the designer picks and chooses elements that are most interesting and cost effective. And the design team now finally starts working on the project with the information very difficult to prioritize, and they focus largely on irrelevant parts, and or their workplace means they want to appeal to their employees' tastes, so like overlooking many factors that are important to the end user. And this is a really common story, and the majority of the built environment is a result of this process. It has the same systemic issues like misunderstanding, which isn't intentional. It's just a bit of a Chinese whispers effect that happens with the kind of, oh, this person wants this thing and this person wants this thing, and then no one's really sure what anyone wants in the end. So they create something quite overly simplistic that doesn't satisfy too many things. So is there a way that we can use modern or better design methodologies to accommodate multiple conflicting needs and give a better clarity of the direct knowledge exchange? So this is actually a really common problem that people face in the design of large-scale applications like computer programming and computer sciences. People use, and I think a lot of the advancements in the computer sciences give really good indicators as to how we should be developing our spaces in the future, as they've kind of I think a rising tide rises all boats in that sense. It's like there's been an enormous advancements in creating public things and open things on the internet, and that allows us to like use some of these methodologies in developing our public spaces better and use them to a degree that maybe hasn't been used. So one of the things that they use in computer programming is a user story, and that's a key, clear, essentially if a user, let me get my words together. So sorry. One of the things that they use is a user story that has a single responsibility principle. So having a single responsibility principle means that every requirement should be formatted so that each page should only show or explain one thing. And if it ends up growing, it should be decomposed into smaller subpages. And by splitting into findings into independent, reusable pieces and thinking about each piece in isolation, we make collaborative research and design easier. So separate researchers and designers can contribute to the same format easily, and requirements can be responded iteratively. So an example of this is user stories, or using user stories as a way of creating a very simple and effective format which can actually be increasingly more complex as each individual might have 10 different user stories and sometimes conflicting. They might not want one thing. So the way to, when you're interviewing people, the way to format this is to say, as a type of user, I want some goal so that some reason, for some reason, and this kind of clear encapsulation helps you identify or clarify what they really mean. So here's an example of a user story. As a member of the community who would like to talk about confidential problems, I don't feel heard in institutional settings like the job centre. I want a confidential room where I can discuss things, and this will be a small room with a window and natural light, and this space would need to be calming so that personal troubles can be spoken about in a confidential way, with or without revolution, just to be heard. And this would differ from spaces seen in the job centre. So the idea is that by talking to multiple people and unpicking multiple user stories, anonymizing these and compiling these together, you start to spot trends. So whereas it seems like quite a simplistic way of gathering or formatting feedback, it actually makes it a lot easier to spot trends and highlight overlaps between needs of user groups that might actually seem on the surface, or we might assume are completely disconnected, such as people from working class and upper middle class or might both enjoy music, you know, and you can start to create activities and understand like the intersectional areas of people's requirements. So moving from this kind of raw data to a clustered data. So I'll give you a quick, I'm not sure if there's, hang on, I'll give you a quick insight into the, so we did these community consultations, and here's an example of can you still see that, guys? Yeah. So here's an example of the like this is 61 user stories at the moment, and the different kinds of user needs that people have asked for, and essentially the way I've unpicked the user needs, I didn't just ask them questions, but I tried to or ask leading questions like, what do you want in a new space, but like kind of what do you need, and are there any things that frustrating you at the moment and you don't have, you know? So there's like elements of kind of things that they would never really say, and spending a lot of time with people in the front over when we were open a few months ago helped do this. So for example, there's a lot of information here about alternative service provision. So as a person disenfranchised with the way I've been treated in statutory service, I want a facility like the job centre that doesn't throw up too many restrictions, not too obviously. And so they feel talked, rather than being talked at, they start feeling like they've been listened to. And there's also like incredible stuff like political think hub. There was one lady really wanted a way to express political views in a forum and unmet things that she otherwise wouldn't have the platform to express. And those start to be really interesting design challenges, because you know a lot of them can be just multi-use spaces. So there's a kind of green areas, people wanting kind of, you know, the same person that might want the political think hub, you know, might say on a second breath they want a bird bee and roof garden, you know, or like they kind of want to see gardening as a process. So like there's an aspect to anonymizing these that makes it useful. Affluent spaces is really interesting, because often those people who are significantly marginalized, or you know, like often want really magnificent and incredible things. You know, because it's like, I just want it to be incredible. I want like this magnificent space where like, you know, we have like beautiful, you know, things everywhere, because like that will be really good for me. Like, and you know, there's aspects around mental health that like attached to that. So those kinds of those user stories can start to be compiled and result in a design challenges and manageable design challenges for different rooms, you know, and the different rooms haven't been completely defined, but actually they're leading into what we design for those rooms, the interventions we make. So we make quite quick, simple interventions that maybe do a multiple of things, a multitude of things in an overlapping way. And that's kind of following the way we do things. Oh, sorry, go back to this. So here's an example of some one-on-one interviews. I think rather than me just talking to you for the whole time, I wanted to give you an experience as to how the interviews looked and seemed from my point of view when I was doing them. So as I say, I spent I spent at least 2 days, 1 or 2 days a week in the space. Back in, I think it was March. Yeah, I think it was July to, it was the time period when we were open. So I spent 2 days each week gathering these.
So you feel is important to you, and you start explaining it, and you try and label it, try and put you in a certain bracket, and then they've got certain like set answers. They try and put you in a place where they can get a set answer when everything's not a set answer. Everyone's individual and they've all got individual needs. So someone just to listen to you in a comfortable environment, even if nothing gets done, you feel like you've put your point of view across and you feel important. Whereas in this office building, you don't. You feel like they're trying to steer you towards a certain group, a certain place where they've got an answer. Sometimes if they haven't got an answer for your individual needs, just say that they ain't got an answer. And just say, we'll look into it and see what we can do. Not try and label you in a way that they've got this set clinical answer for you. And that, you get a lot of frustration out of a lot of people. Make them feel important, self-worth, if you know what I mean.
So there's an example of one of the user stories that I read earlier, which was about kind of making sure people feel listened to and important, and there's alternative spaces for alternative service provision. But there are also really the diversity of people that come into the food hall have like extensively different requirements. So one person, for example, is Mike, who's this incredible guy that almost all of his needs were centered around color and emotion. So he has height and color sensitivity, and he has a really quite a large, extensive theory of color rooted in kind of Rudolf Steiner's color theory, it seems, which is incredible to uncover. But when I was asking him what he wanted, he was almost always just talking to me in terms of, you know, greens and blues, you know, in this area. And like, you know, it was less of like needs, but more like kind of emotional and sensitivity to the world he was living in. He wanted it to be more accommodating for the world he saw. So here's a quick wait, hang on. These different colors how they made you feel as well.
Where did we start from? We started
with green, pink, pastels, turquoise, blues, yellows.
So going back, shall we start from when we started on the beginning?
You can take a look at
on greens, it's a bit wet this. We start on greens, which is more of a balancing point. So what might be nice is perhaps when people come in and they find the balancing point, that's the first thing they see or feel. And that's almost like going into a woods and you see the greenery. So it's a bit like you're going into a little green forest for the first time. And you'd have some lovely fauna and green and bits of gold, you know, and a bit of sunlight glistening on it, a little bit of sofa. So it feels like you're going into a nice, relaxing space straight away. Dream. How does that feel?
It feels nice, actually.
So there's like a lot of incredible stuff around color that we were I mapped out, or I managed to kind of unpick what he was wanting in terms of the different spaces and like where they are. He had quite a set understanding of which kinds of rooms should be different colors. And yeah, it's important to respond to things like that. But there are also things like, particularly like, I've done a lot of consultation with Bevan about the community kitchen. So there are particular design challenges around how we create a better community kitchen. So these are the user stories so far on that. And these are things like kind of essentially looking at how you don't just have a single person cooking, but you also have maybe different satellite kitchens which allow different people to cook in different ways in the same space. So we have, like, you know, because Bevan's he's an anarchist, so kind of how can you immortalize these ideas into cooking and the way we cook, and that's a big question. So like maybe not doing everything entirely literally, but like trying to aspire to create that where possible is important. There are also things about just how the natural circulation building works to consider. So there's a lot of the subjective things and the kind of user needs and the user stories we've developed, which I'll share with you guys. You can take a glance at, but there's also a lot in terms of kind of how the natural circulation of the spaces work. And that's like a quick space syntax analysis of the areas where there'll be a high concentration of people and where people would hang out a lot. So designing for those spaces, particularly, even though they seem a bit like strange to design for, like they should be the ones, you know. For instance, this hallway here is a hangout spot, and I've noticed that since just being around in the building. Like, so designing a little accommodating that hangout spot is probably something else thinking about. And yeah, like did a lot of analysis as to how the building might react. I'm not sure if you're aware, or the architects in the room will know about space syntax, but essentially it's a way of identifying which rooms will become busy depending on how highly connected they are. So these are a quick analysis of how different rooms become busy, and essentially this is really important because when we're making something public, a lot of the time things don't have oversight. So there are some rooms that will have a lot of natural oversight, what's the word, I guess, safety, because there's people in the area and kind of overlooking things, you know. But there are some rooms which are potentially more isolated, and they might be areas where things like drug taking can happen, and like things like fights can emerge, you know. So this is an example of the analysis of the different ways of opening the different doors in the building. And this was how essentially we had the building, I think it was here. Sorry, let me find the right one. Front and back. Yeah, essentially this blue or this dark purple here is the most isolated space in the building. And already we've experienced issues here with one person kind of locking themselves up and smashing a window in this room. And this is actually something that is to be noted and kind of understood as potentially a space that we need to design for and accommodate as an isolated space. So maybe that's a reading room or something else like that, rather than it being a space where people can kind of lock themselves away, and also design some kind of system of like a bit of passive oversight, you know, putting the right people in those spaces, so to ensure that there's a natural level, which if we do open up say the whole building to allow people to flow through it, we don't have areas where people can can do things like lock themselves away and kind of like and like take like hard drugs, which is something that would happen if we were to allow everyone to flow through without any kind of design for to make sure that didn't happen. It's also like normally quite bad to put really hard like nose on those things, because you start ended up like with gates, you start ending up kind of creating kind of like, I guess, really hard thresholds and really hard kind of like gates which people react against. Like if you've ever been to any homeless shelters or any kind of charitable organizations that deal with people in significantly marginalized places, often they'll create these obscene prison-like situations for people that people are just reacting against every time. And for a long time in Foodhall, for about 4 years, we didn't have a single case of violence. And that was because we kind of created a system where there were a few key community members that were making sure that things were calm. And we kind of created it so that like it was a positive and happy space. So the semiotics want ignited in those people that might make them act badly or create violence or do theft. And we did have some like people stealing, but we haven't had that much stolen considering how open we've allowed people to flow through. So it's like we've had like maybe on in total probably about £1,000 worth of equipment stolen over like 5 years, and we've had like loads of the spaces open, and that's a really huge success. Like normally that never happens in services, there's stuff stolen all the time. So yeah, there's an element of design that works with that, and that comes from design. So yeah, just jumping into, I've only made sketches so far as to how the building might be, the program might be organized. But I guess the way we're thinking of organizing and responding to the space is, now that we've got the community consultations, a lot of it done, and I hope that we can build more user stories from the people I haven't spoken to yet. Like looking at each space almost as a separate project or a different project, you know? So like the courtyard area might, you know, it's looking like it will be some kind of amphitheater space with some kind of, you know, a little performance area and green, you know, space, and also a big roof, like we were talking about that with Carissa as well, kind of like a lovely roof structure. So kind of building these in pieces as independent projects, and the rooms as kind of with individual requirements, might make it a lot more manageable for different designers, different things to happen. Yeah, here's an example of maybe the courtyard. This was by an artist down in London who was interested in creating some responding to that, a BMAE artist who was interested in responding to the political kind of think hub idea. So yeah, there's a lot of this as well. Like I know James Harrington's in the room, so we thinking about this idea of and we had this conversation about flexible spaces, building from the DS2 and the Stagehands project, kind of integrating and merging those two things together. So in terms of the art spaces, the idea is maybe we'll create this kind of or the art spaces that will be in the future, we create this flexible kind of art space which allows a lot of exhibitions and things to happen, which might mean creating things that can be used as walls on one part, as tables on the other, you know, as benches on the other, and just going in a bit harder on designing those flexible elements on CAD, and kind of like designing a series of new things that can then be tested among with both developed here, but also like can be shipped out to different members of the NFS network to try and play with. And we've got the CNC machine now at the moment for that activity that we've got in the space, so we can start testing and CNCing ideas in relation to that. So yeah, this is just looking at a little bit more detailed stuff. So here's an example of Mike's color palette, and this is essentially from his conversation. There was like a few hours of conversation there. His kind of how he wants, you know, if you're to map what he wants the spaces to be in terms of their sensation, their color sensation, he wants it to feel a little bit like this. And then it seems very trippy, like when you look at it like this, but like actually it wouldn't be the floor that's painted these, it might be the elements, or it might be the kind of the general look and feel of the different spaces, because they relate to the different modes of transition and kind of like the different ideas of what a space represents in a building. So yeah, this is a quick sketch, an early sketch of the kitchen, which I need to send out to the kitchen channel, looking at kind of different things. And yeah, there's an early sketch of the disabled toilet, which eventually will have as a larger a full disabled toilet. But yeah, this is responding to maybe some of the needs from the user story so far. So yeah, there's other stuff that's like really cool about community spirit. So like I found this lady has, you know, been drawing these incredible patterns all the way through lockdown to help with her mental health. So they look like this, and then these kind of like Islamic patterns that she picked up a book in Foodhall and has been drawing on them for the last 6 months.
Whoa, that's incredible. Could you tell me a little bit of a story about them? Oh, sorry. She's saying now, just like be calm. Okay.
It's just basically like it's like a hobby of mine that I do, really. Keeps your mind and de-stresses you, and just one day I just started doing it, and it's turned out like I just wanted to do them, really. So that's just like a big hobby of mine, and hopefully I'm trying to do like a big mural thing. I'm trying to get them so they're going to start drawing this like a big like patchwork thing.
Yeah, could you lay them out on this desk and tell me a little bit about?
I don't know if it's going to go away.
Okay.
But I like that, really.
Wow.
So I'll stop it there, but essentially there's a series she's done like so many of these, so integrating these kinds of patterns into building the kind of spaces. Yeah, thinking about these are early sketches about different tile pattern spaces and ideas about, I guess, like how we can like look at entrances in this garage area. So yeah, there's a lot to be done, but I think that's the presentation so far. I think that's everything. It's definitely an interim presentation, and mainly like a lot of the stuff is about the community consultation process, which I hope will help us. Now we've got a lot of the groundwork for that stuff in place, we can start to go in a bit harder with the actual design work and start to like develop the design properly, because a lot of and also there's an element of developing more user stories as we continue, and making sure we listen to a few of the groups that we haven't managed to talk to, such as the film group that were really active last in 2019. They did like, you know, 20 or 30 film screenings, but they weren't so active in the past year or 2 years. So yeah, are there any questions? I'll open up to the floor. Hello?
It's just very exciting.
Yeah, no particular questions. It just looks great.
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can have like an MVC research centre in one of the rooms.
Let's put it down as a story. That's what we need. We can design it.
Brilliant. I love it. I love this thinking about, like, for me it's like thinking about politics in 3D. You know, you coming at it from this architecture background, so you're thinking about, you know, architecture as software. But so I suppose my version of that is, I don't know, like coming at it from the other side, seeing architecture as like community and society and politics in concrete, you know.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that we can design spaces to try and move towards our political values is just amazing. It's like another mode of agency, or, you know, collective design or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, constitutions, ways of making agreements that we're thinking about in all that living whatchamacallit stuff, you know, how we make decisions and how we design that in a 3D way, and then how we actually design the spaces as well, all being connected to the same set of values.
Yeah, I think it's really beautiful because it allows us to, I think the new modes of practices, or how we develop the built environment, I hope will become more common and more sophisticated, because a lot of the time the way that people build, especially alternative groups, design and build their spaces and make them public, is normally that they will do it really, what's the word?
Tokenistic.
Sorry?
Or like tokenistic.
Tokenistic, or it will be like really, it'll be really difficult to get the rich diversity of needs into the space. You know, it's like always like, oh, well, if it's one thing, then it can't be these other things, you know? But like, is there a way of just going, well, maybe at 6 p.m. it's that thing, and then in 2 p.m. it's that thing, you know, and the same things like change in terms of the, like, accommodate these, I think, slightly different ways of seeing and being, but like, actually they're not mutually exclusive. You don't need a, you know, something can be like a cafe, and then it can also be like a kind of,
I think that architects often end up doing that, where they want a space to be so flexible and it can be used for everything, that they end up not designing anything because they want it so generic that it just ends up being a shed or a warehouse, because then it's flexible and then you aren't telling people what to do. And I think what you're managing to do is actually be kind of flexible while still actually, you know, proposing something, and not just introducing generic space. And I think that's why it's so important what you were saying about sort of designing the social program, rather than just saying there's all these programs, I'm just the architect, I'm going to design a box that all the programs can fit into because it's that generic. But you're actually, by designing the social program, you can design specificity and flexibility around it. I also really liked your the participation aspect. I think like we both come from, or have this background at the Sheffield School of Architecture, where I often felt like participation was taught as this like supreme value, that we all must participate, and participation can be all these different creative things, but often it's kind of academic and abstract. And I think you've managed to like both do it and present it in a way that's very like accessible and real, but still has all those like academic ideas and values, but it sort of has found a like grounding and a place. And that's, yeah, I think that's also great to communicate to architecture students when you have the opportunity.
Mm.
I think adding on what Lorenza said, though, I think the way that you learn about participation is through getting a book about participation, and you see a couple of nice pictures, and you have to interrogate the text to really kind of understand what's going on and how that's come about and the methods they've used. And it's just quite refreshing to actually see something tangible happening, something that we have a familiarity with, that we can understand how it's coming together and how it's working. This is really nice.
Well, thanks for the kind. Thank you, guys. I think that like this is the thing, that this last thing is that what this is actually a cause of a lot of problems, but also a lot of solutions at the same time. It's like the city for everyone is one made by everyone, and that's like an idea we had on our wall for a long time. But then at the same time, what can happen really often is that things can the processes to allow the city to be made by everyone don't happen. Like someone might not be able to build the thing that they need to build, you know, like, or someone might not even be able to express it in a public forum because they're embarrassed or shy about that, you know. And like, you can't just say, well, everyone's talking here and being a big group, and then actually there's an element of like scratching the surface. I think that one of the things that doing a lot of one-on-one time with like end users and things like that has helped is navigate that that, I guess, the paradox of needs, you know, where there's people who want things, and then there's people who want the best for other people, but they don't know what the best is always, you know. And there's also like, there's people who want to empower other people and want to be empowered themselves, and they're not actually sure how that will happen. And kind of working out how that all comes together is like, I think using like things like user stories and like going through that portal or pathway, I think now it feels like it's a lot more manageable to deal with the different requests. And I'm a really advocate of that approach, because it feels a lot more, I hate to use the word scientific, but it feels a bit more scientific in the sense that you kind of create an observation and you can collect the data of that observation and then see what people really want. And then you can test it and see whether it's true or not, because actually you might have an error in that. And then it might kind of become, you know, and that avoids, I guess, hearsay or kind of like ideas around that. So yeah, like developing that more, like there's a lot more people to interview still, but it's difficult to find the time to talk to everyone and make sure no one's missed out, you know. That's been one of my major challenges. So
but yeah, I think that's also very true, and it kind of relates to what we were saying about flexibility versus genericness. This idea that like if it's made by everyone, it is probably going to be like very messy, and you have to actually as also design that process to make sure that it actually works and that everyone actually has a voice and a way to contribute. And I think it also goes back to what you mentioned, Bevan being an anarchist and wanting the space to reflect that. And I think there's something in that as well, that the way you design that you design these processes of engagement is kind of doing the work of, I suppose, making anarchism work, because it's not like a free for all where everything goes because then the loudest person just wins kind of thing. You're actually building the structures to allow everyone to sort of communicate and contribute meaningfully. So yeah, good job again.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope. Sorry, yeah, hey.
I'd be quite interested to see kind of the ideas so far about all the different uses of the space, only because like listening to this and compared to when visiting the space, I kind of was quite struck by how it does feel like lots of different spaces, as you mentioned, but already feels like they've been kind of allocated, they're starting to be allocated with things that I can't, that seem like quite unflexible. You know, like a kitchen, obviously, that's got a lot of hardware with it, bike workshop, warehouse, all these different things. So I'd be quite interested to see how those kind of uses can be designed flexibly.
Yeah, and this is another thing is that, like, in a way it's like we need to I guess we just need more people involved in this process as well from outside, because you're right, like a lot of people have put things in the space, which is really important, but then it is about making sure that we design things so that it's thinking for the long term, you know, as well, like, because I think that that's been one of the major challenges of like doing the process of community consultation and trying to understand what people need, and at the same time having an implication that we need to use the space quite immediately, as I mentioned at the beginning, has been like a bit of a tension, because then it is the loud, you know, it is the urgent thing that needs to happen then and there gets put in there, and everything else is not seen as relevant, or it's important, or it's stupid. You know, it's like a lot of people think sometimes the biggest comment I get about why, you know, whenever I'm suggesting something that a end user has suggested, is that it's stupid. Do you know? Or that it's like like that, you know, why would we spend too much? But then often you can scratch the surface and you realize, well, that's sometimes it's an innate need, you know, or it's like a thing. Just because it isn't everywhere in society doesn't mean that like shouldn't exist. It's just that we haven't got it yet, you know. Like we haven't no one's bothering to design for it, you know, like that's all the only problem that there is. So it's sometimes I think the things that make most sense do seem a bit stupid, you know, like weirdly, but as long as they're backed by evidence and not real stupidity, then I think they're okay, you know. But yeah, you're right, Hannah. That's one of the things, and I think building more user stories and building more evidence for why people need certain things is probably a good way of navigating that, you know.
Yeah, because it's there's so much space there, but it could so easily like not end up with any just open, like flexible use space.
Well, it's at a premium as well. It's in a nice space, and everyone will want you know. So there's an element of like making sure that we keep calm and deliver deliver it in the best way we can, because I think it will pay dividends over the long term in terms of how happy the community are. It's definitely with Foodhall it's helped, like, you know, like our services have been a bit off the wall in many ways, and then we get really rave reviews from many of the people who use it day to day, you know, and that's that's like, it's just having trust in that, like, I think is a good way of like navigating it. Yeah, I think you're right, Hannah. Something to watch out for. But I think maybe what I can do is share the user stories with you, and also you can add a few if you want them. Just make it in the same format, you know, like your own user stories, but also things that you've heard, you know, so that we can begin to contribute more things, and then when we get into the design in the flesh, I guess we can start to like pick off as many challenges as we can all at once. You know, I guess that's the next phase. So yeah.
Nice.
Right. Is there any other comments? Any other thoughts?
How is there like is there support or kind of anything that we could help or put input in on this? Is it, do you need anything?
Well, I think that at the moment the major thing is kind of like, if we follow a bit of a process in terms of like formatting, if you've got needs, say what you were saying, Carissa, or you've seen or spotted any other needs, formatting them in the same way that I've been formatted them, so that there's just a common way of doing it. Because I think that it's a bit of a universal system where we can start to build those, and actually after we've delivered some of the things, we can still keep on developing or understanding what the users need, you know. So yeah, if you've got some ideas, I can send you over the user storyboards, and you can start to put a few of your own on there, or things that you've experienced that people have told you, that then we can respond to. And I think that this today is a bit of a process of opening this up a little bit more, and just sharing the methodologies, and kind of like building on them, and making a bit of shared ground as to what the where we are right now. And actually, like, I think there's quite a lot of design work to do, and a lot more kind of like, I still think there's a bit more community research and, like, you know, development in terms of the needs to be made, because I haven't spoken to everyone yet. But there are elements which are clear that you can start designing, you know, like the kitchen, and, you know, like there are bits that you can kind of grapple with early, and you don't have to wait around for everything to.
And bits of painting, I guess, as well.
Yeah, bits of painting.
A lot of painting to be done.
Yeah, so we can, and also I guess that there's the design stuff is like, maybe James and Lawrence like can, I mean, James, we've already had a discussion about the flexible space stuff, which we've got to build on a little bit more. But then that kind of like, to design something like that, we need to work out what the arts offering's going to be, do you know, like, and like all of the stuff like from the user stories, and like, so that, yeah, that's really how, but I think the main thing is, yeah, inputting into that board, or inputting into these boards, and then just I'll send them out on Slack, and we can keep the discussion going, and maybe we could have a session as well about it, like afterwards, maybe one thing we could do is look at the users, maybe have a session, which I didn't really want to do in this one, but in the future, have a session where we can look at all of the things, the needs that there are, and try to start arranging them in smaller groups into the different rooms as they might go, and then describe why we would arrange them that way. Do you know what I mean? Like things that we see like are mutually beneficial, or things that we see like we might be able to not do, you know, because there's always going to be things that we won't be able to do, you know, and things that we omit, like in a way, like that's a bigger decision. It's like, whose voices do we not hear? Like, and we recognize that we're not hearing those or doing those certain things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, suppose even going on from this kind of continual kind of feedback, like there'll be some, I mean, it's kind of touching what you said before, but it's like, say the kitchen might have a longer term tenure than, say, like I don't know, like there might be a very specific space for a very specific craft or hobby, or like something that a small group of people want to use. But that might have a small tenure, or it might end up staying on forever. But, you know, like the kitchen will probably be there for a fair length of time, and then other activities could change. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, yeah, it kind of, I suppose it goes back to your original drawing in a way about how these spaces could shift. But like almost categorizing the sort of length that these activities, or the infrastructure that you put in place in those spaces for those activities to happen, could last for different lengths of time, or could be like you could use the kind of more temporary stuff that, you know, can be dismantled and changed within a matter of days or less.
Yeah, it's a really it's a good point, and maybe we should have a session if you're up for it soon. I know we have a lot of conversations, but maybe make a few different meetings from this, or stemming from this, that we sort of start thinking about those things a bit more in detail. Because Carissa, you had a one.
Well, I was using my finger as a one. Only when you're ready.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go for it.
It's it might be a bit off topic of what we're kind of focusing on today, but a lot of what I've kind of been reading lately is about the real significance of, you know, for community and relationships as the foundation of like transformative politics and so on, of societies. Just the significance of face-to-face being, you know, actually being, and how kind of qualitatively different it is. for various reasons. And so much of what we're talking about and what kind of is valued at Foodhall is also connected to all of that thinking. And so I'm thinking about, you know, incorporating into the design aspect of this a space that is sort of a bit pandemic resistant or resilient. You know, all the stuff we know about ventilation, and I don't know, like, I don't think this kind of this virus era is over by any means. It may just be starting, because none of the conditions that kind of brought the pandemic have changed. And some of those conditions are the same ones that we're kind of engaged with transforming or resisting or whatever, maybe. Sorry, I'm rambling, but
No.
I wonder if it's a kind of more conscious part of our design thinking, that there may be ways in which this space allows us to be together
I mean, that was kind of a thread.
in the ways that other spaces haven't allowed us to be together because of the way they're designed. You know, I was thinking, I mean, we were having in another meeting, we were having a discussion about like when we can have a party and be together, and maybe we could have like a space themed party so that we're all wearing protective gear as part of the party, you know, like we all have to make our own spacesuits, but like whether there's some way in which we can build in a resilience to these times when, I don't know, is it making any sense at all?
No,
that we
it
can,
really
we kind of politically embrace face to face in an era when we're going to be prevented from doing that, which has all sorts of political implications for the other ways in which our lives are being controlled, or, you know, I don't know how extreme you want me to go, but it's a political stand in a way to make our space have a kind of resilience to virus. I don't know, like lots of screens, or I don't know, yeah.
Well, it's the opposite to all the restaurants that have this whole time had tables barricading the entrances because, yeah, their spaces are no longer usable because they're all segmented and tiny, and people.
Yeah. When actually ventilation and stuff is a really big part of making spaces safer. But if we do need to think about creating barriers, whether the way that we think about those barriers is different, as you know, just like clear screens or clear walls or movable walls, which is all part of making the space flexible for lots of different uses as well, isn't it? I don't know, I just love there to be a way that we don't have to like clear the building every time this happens.
Yeah, if another crisis, I guess it's building crisis in. Like, okay, there will be crisis, and we've got
but not just to build crisis in, but to value
the response.
That our transformative agenda is built into some resilience around this particular kind of crisis, because this particular kind of crisis is particularly impactful on our agenda of face-to-face significance, face-to-face for social connection and transformation. Which, just because I've been reading a book called The Communism of Love or something, which captures a lot of this, it talks a lot about this, like the deeper political significance of interacting face to face. It just, you know, occurs to me that that's already there in the relationship values of Foodhall and the community building values, and that seems to have an architectural significance.
Yeah, I think it's really, really valid. I think that like
roofs that come off, So they're technically outside.
Well, that's it. It's like, even if it's like focusing on the roof, I guess that it's an area of like, where do we because the way I'm seeing it is that each space might be a bit of a project in itself, like to make it manageable, so that it can be like, okay, these people can have a lot of input into this area, and these people can, do you know, and then that allows, you know,
and the kind of the roof garden idea, you know,
because it's like
that if we came into a lottery win, we were going to throw money at.
No. But then like I think the roof garden stuff, like I think it will eventually happen. I think the more quality work we do in the space, the more it will be visible. Do you know? The more it becomes self-evident. Like, you don't really, it's like you don't need to chase funders all the time when you've got something so amazing and they come to it and they go, this is mind-blowing, and then they go, well, okay, we're going to fund that one. Do you know, like it's a different method of like trying to do it. It's like, we'll just come into the space, take a look at what we're doing in here, and we can share what we're doing, and then hopefully funding will come. Or that's my faith, you know, like that that's existed in the Foodhall in the past, is like we didn't have any funding to begin with, and then suddenly it's like happened just because of what we do, you know, rather than the other way around. Too often things happen the other way around, you know, and that actually sometimes isn't, it leads you to create uncreative responses, because people who are the mediators might not actually know exactly what's needed, you know, like they might say, oh, these are the parameters you need to respond to, but they might just like get something wrong, and then you have to talk a lot about a certain word, which, you know, it's only a word, you know, it's not real. Like, it's like, well, words are real, but like that's another thing. I want to get into, like,
words are fake.
Words are fake. All words are fake.
Don't feel fake.
Sorry?
Words don't feel fake.
Words
I mean, I know what you're saying, but I'm not sure. Anyway, that's a different meeting.
That's a different.
That's
philosophical
semantics. Foodhall semantics. Yeah.
Foodhall semantics. Well, what's it? What's his name? Sorry, Noam Chomsky. That's like a Noam Chomsky thing.
Yeah, or Wittgenstein or something.
We go.
We create problems for ourselves with language.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Okay. Well, that was really good. Thank you for the comments, guys, and thanks for the thanks for the input as well. Like, I think that there's a call to arms with more sessions building on this stuff, and getting more user stories developed. So maybe I'll just post about that. Maybe in the next few weeks we can have a bit of a session where we look at the user stories and just kind of like map them out in relation to what you know, and also add some new ones that aren't there, you know. Like, in the meantime, I can send it over to you guys and you can check over it and start to add new categories and, like, you know, play around with those boards, you know. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yeah.
Wicked. Thanks, guys, appreciate it. I'll see you on the next breakfast talk. Come to the next breakfast talk.
When is it?
All right, ciao.
When's the next breakfast talk, Louis?
Friday.
This Friday.
I think I'm going to be talking about governance. Yeah.
Cool.
And I'm doing an introduction to MVC on sometime.
Foodhall Virtual Space.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.